The winter wind howled over the shattered no-man's land, carrying with it the metallic scent of frozen mud and decay. Under the pale moonlight, the land looked like something from another world, a wasteland of wire, shell holes, and the half-buried dead. Private Samuel Duval trudged forward, his boots sinking into the frozen muck with every step. His regiment had been ordered to retrieve the wounded left behind after last night's failed raid. Only 4 of them had volunteered to go back, men either too brave or too haunted to refuse. The others called this place the Wire. It was the stretch of ground between trenches that even ghosts avoided. "Keep low," Sergeant Hale whispered, his breath steaming through the scarf around his mouth. "We're not alone out here." Samuel nodded, his rifle clutched tightly though he knew it would do little good. The fog was so thick it moved like a living thing. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Somewhere in the dark, a flare hissed to life, bathing the ground in harsh white light. For a moment, Samuel saw them, bodies tangled in wire, faces half buried in frost, eyes staring at nothing. Then the flare died, and the world went black again. They moved on, guided only by the faint moans of the wounded. The sound was faint, almost ghostly, somewhere between a whisper and a plea. Samuel followed it, heart pounding. He found the man half buried in snow near the lip of a crater. A young German, barely older than Samuel himself. His face was white as wax, eyes fluttering as he tried to breathe. A gas mask hung uselessly around his neck. "Help me," the German croaked, voice trembling. Samuel froze. Training told him to finish the job. Humanity told him to kneel. He knelt. "Easy," he whispered. "I've got you." The German's eyes flicked open, wide, glassy, terrified. His hand gripped Samuel's wrist weakly. "No doctor, no doctor." "I'm not your doctor," Samuel said softly. "Just someone who doesn't want you to die alone." The young man tried to smile but couldn't. The fog thickened, swallowing them both. And as Samuel worked to free the soldier from the wire, he realized how strange it was, how quiet the battlefield had become. Then he heard it, faint footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting to see Hale or one of the others. But instead, there were figures in the mist, silhouettes of soldiers, dozens of them, standing silently in the smoke. Their uniforms were ragged, their faces hidden in shadow. Samuel's breath caught. The German in his arms looked up weakly. "They come every night." "What do you mean?" Samuel whispered. But before the man could answer, the shapes began to move closer, slowly, deliberately, the way fog creeps through a field. Samuel stepped back, gripping his rifle. He blinked, and for a moment, the figures were gone. "Just missed." Then one of them whispered his name. He dropped to one knee, shaking. "Duval." It was a voice he knew. A voice from weeks ago. "Thomas?" Samuel's voice broke. His best friend had died during the last push, cut down by machine gun fire before Samuel could reach him. The mist shifted again, and there in the haze was Thomas. Or something wearing his face. "Why'd you leave me?" the ghost whispered. Samuel's mouth went dry. "You were gone," he said. "You were gone." The fog closed in tighter. The moans of the wounded turned to whispers, voices overlapping, murmuring words Samuel couldn't understand. He stumbled backward toward the crater, dragging the wounded German. "We have to go," he shouted. But when he turned, the German was gone. Only the empty wire remained, swaying in the wind like skeletal fingers. And then, he heard the sound, boots in the mud. Many boots. Sergeant Hale appeared from the mist, panting. "Duval! What the hell are you doing?" You look like you've seen a ghost. Samuel stared past him. I think I have, sir. Hale frowned. Come on. We've got to move before the shelling starts again. They made their way back to the line, but Samuel couldn't stop glancing over his shoulder. Every time he did, he swore he saw shadows following, hundreds of them, marching silently beneath the wire, their faces hidden by the fog. That night, in the trench, Samuel sat awake while the others slept. He took out a small notebook and began to write, his hands trembling. They never left. None of them did. The ghosts beneath the wire still walk. Maybe they're waiting for the rest of us to join them. He paused, staring at the page. Then, without realizing it, he wrote one last line. Tomorrow, I think I'll go back. The next night came with a silence that felt wrong. No shelling, no gunfire, no orders shouted through the din, only a stillness that stretched across the front like a held breath. The stars above the trench glimmered faintly through a thin mist. Private Samuel Duval sat with his back against the frozen wall, the notebook still open in his lap. The words he'd written the night before stared back at him like a challenge. Tomorrow, I think I'll go back. He hadn't meant it. Or maybe he had. The thought had burrowed into his skull and refused to leave. The faces in the fog, the whispers calling his name, they hadn't been dreams. He knew that much. He closed the notebook and slid it into his coat pocket. Around him, the trench slept, men slumped against their rifles, breathing heavy in the cold. Even Sergeant Hale was out, head bowed over his clasped hands like a man praying he'd wake up anywhere else. Samuel rose quietly, boots sinking into the half-frozen mud. His breath came out in clouds as he climbed the ladder and peered over the edge. The wasteland stretched before him, a field of broken earth, coiled wire, and blackened craters. It was almost beautiful in its stillness. He swung his leg over and dropped into the open. Every step forward was like walking into another world. The fog pressed around him, muffling sound, bending shapes. Once, he thought he heard distant voices singing, low, haunting, like a hymn carried on the wind. He followed the sound toward the place where he'd seen them, the ghosts beneath the wire. The ground there was pitted and slick with frost. He found the same crater where the German boy had been, empty now. Only his helmet remained, half buried in the mud, marked with a faint cross scratched into the steel. Samuel crouched and ran a gloved hand over it. "I'm sorry," he whispered. When he looked up, the mist had thickened. Figures were moving again, faint outlines, dozens of them, walking slowly across the field. Their heads bowed, their movements heavy, rhythmic, like soldiers marching in silence. "Thomas?" Samuel called out, his voice trembling. The nearest figure stopped. Slowly, it turned toward him. The fog shifted, and Samuel saw the face, pale, mud-streaked, eyes hollow. It was Thomas. Or what was left of him. "You came back," Thomas said, his voice echoing strangely, like it came from deep underwater. Samuel's chest tightened. "You shouldn't be here." Thomas took a step closer, his boots making no sound in the mud. "Neither should you." The other ghosts began to gather, circling. British, German, French, men from both sides, their faces all the same, grey, expressionless, endless. "What do you want?" Samuel asked, backing up. Thomas tilted his head. "You already know. We're still fighting. Every night. The war never ends for us." The words cut through him like shrapnel. "That's not true," Samuel said. "The war will end. Someday." Thomas smiled, a cold, broken thing. "Then why are you still here?" Samuel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked around. The ghosts were closing in now, their shapes flickering in and out of the mist. The ground beneath his boots began to tremble. A distant sound rumbled through the fog, the low, hollow moan of artillery being loaded. Then, the first shell fell. The explosion tore the night open, fire, smoke, and screaming metal raining down. Samuel dropped to the ground, covering his head as dirt and bone showered over him. When he looked up, the ghosts were gone. Only the mist remained. He stumbled to his feet, coughing, blood dripping from a cut across his forehead. The air smelled of cordite and rot. In the crater beside him, something gleamed, a rusted rifle half buried in the earth. He reached for it, but his fingers brushed against something else, a hand. Cold. Still. He froze. The hand was his. He stared at his own body lying there in the mud, eyes open, blank, the same notebook still tucked into his coat. "No," Samuel whispered. "No, no, no." The realization came slowly, like dawn breaking over a dead field. He wasn't alive anymore. He stood, trembling, and looked around. The fog was alive again, figures moving through it, whispering softly. Thomas stood among them, waiting. "You see now," Thomas said quietly. "You're one of us." Samuel sank to his knees, the world spinning. The notebook in his pocket felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of every name, every face he'd tried to remember. "What happens now?" he asked, voice shaking. Thomas looked out over the field. "Now, we walk. Until someone remembers us." The fog swallowed them both as dawn broke over the wire, silent, grey, and endless. And somewhere beneath that haunted stretch of ground, the ghosts of no man's land marched once more, bound by war, bound by memory, bound by silence. Spring, 1936. The war had been over for nearly 2 decades, but in France, the soil still whispered. Fields once scorched by fire had grown over with grass, yet each plough that turned the earth unearthed another relic, a dented helmet, a rusted bayonet, sometimes a bone that told its own quiet story. Professor Etienne Rousseau walked carefully through the uneven ground of Verdun's outskirts, his boots sinking into the soft mud. He was a historian, not of kings and treaties, but of the forgotten. His grey hair was swept back, his spectacles streaked with dust. He carried a small leather satchel, and within it, a simple mission, to document the personal remnants of the men who died here. The air carried the scent of wet grass and old cordite. "Careful there, Professor," called his assistant, Lucy, a young woman with an energy that cut through the heaviness of the place. She was kneeling beside a crater, brushing away dirt from something half buried. Etienne approached, peering over her shoulder. "What is it?" Lucy lifted a small, mud-caked book, the leather cover cracked, the edges rotted. The faint outline of a name was barely visible, pressed into the spine. "Looks like a journal," she said softly. Etienne's heartbeat quickened. He took it carefully, turning it over in his hands. A bullet hole pierced through one corner. The clasp was rusted shut, but when he pried it open, the faint scent of damp paper and age rose up. Inside, the first page bore a few smudged words. "Private Samuel Duval, 5th Battalion." Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, "If someone finds this, tell my mother I tried to come home." Lucy looked up at him. "Do you think it's real?" Etienne nodded slowly, eyes scanning the faded ink. "More real than most things." They spent the rest of the day reading by the edge of the crater. The journal told of mud and fear, of letters never sent and nights when the sky burned red. It spoke of Thomas, of ghosts in the mist, of soldiers who marched after death. When they reached the final page, the handwriting grew frantic, uneven, the lines trailing off mid-sentence. I saw them again tonight. The ones who stayed behind. Thomas says the war never ends. The rest was blotted out by rain and mud. Lucy shivered. He thought he saw ghosts. Etienne closed the journal. Reverence, though some dismissed it as hallucination born of trauma. But one evening, long after the applause had faded, Etienne sat alone in his study with the original notebook open before him. He ran a finger along the final page, the one that ended mid-sentence. Something caught his eye. Under the lamplight, faint impressions were visible, words pressed into the page from the force of the pen, too faded to see at first. He held it closer. "We walk until someone remembers us." Etienne froze. The words hadn't been in the version he'd read before. He rubbed his eyes, but the letters remained, carved faintly into the damp paper. A chill ran through him. He turned another page. New handwriting had appeared, fresher, darker, ink that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for remembering." The lamp flickered. Outside, a soft wind moved through the grass, a sound like boots stepping in rhythm. Etienne looked up, heart pounding. Beyond the window, the fields were still. But in the faint moonlight, he thought he saw them, the shapes of men walking across the horizon, their figures dissolving into mist. He whispered to himself, "They are still here." He closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf beside him, his hands trembling. The next morning, when Lucy came to visit, she found the lamp still burning and the chair empty. The notebook sat open on the desk. On the last page, in a handwriting that was neither Samuel's nor Etienne's, 6 new words had appeared. "The war never ends for us." And somewhere beyond Verdun, in the quiet dawn, the ghosts beneath the wire kept walking, unseen, unending, remembered at last.